Is homelessness a conspiracy by design, or is it a reflection of bad management policies? Is homelessness the ugly side of capitalism, or was homelessness built into the system for the elites to dispossess the weak and ignorant? What causes a person to give up? And when you give up, was it by design of policies or poor decisions on your part? I'd love to hear what you think down in the comments, but wait until the end so you can get the full story. Let's look at the world around us. In the 1960s, we had endless opportunities as part of the post-World War II economy. When we think of homelessness from the 60s to the 80s, we think of burnout hippies that partied too much, or as George Carlin said, boomers went from cocaine to Rogaine. How much of modern homelessness is still the same problem since the days of the hippie versus being an economics problem? Since 2000, we've had the dot-com bubble, 9/11, the great financial crisis of 2008, shutdowns of 2020, and now we're in 2024. We're now facing global conflict, supply chain disruptions from strikes and civil or political conflict. On the surface, our problems look like they stem from poor leadership. However, I'd like to remind you that Congress is beholden to its wealthy donors and lobbyists. If you're a student of history, you'd be familiar with the Ford Foundation report about future management of natural resources circa about 1930. You'd also be familiar with the first government report to confirm the Ford Foundation's findings, known as the Paley Report. The Paley Report would be the foundation for Global 2000, Agenda 2030, and Agenda 2050. The elites within the government decided that they were smarter than the average American, so government policies were introduced to force the reduction of the population. The first of these policies is known as sex education, which almost cost President Nixon his re-election. Taking this into account with another piece of information given to us from Billy Meyer, in 2017, the ruling elites wanted to make sure that they had total control over the political and economic system moving forward. And what they would do is end up using a pandemic as a way to implement these new changes in policy. This makes one ask the question, if they resorted to this, how much control did they have before Trump? I don't think this is a coincidence that this happened right after the inauguration of Donald Trump. Now that we have a foundation of facts to work with, now let's really see if this is by design or poor management. Let's use a couple of examples. First, let's introduce Bob. Bob graduated in the top third of his high school class. Bob decided he wanted to go to college and get a good job. He decided he wanted to get a degree in human resource management. Bob does well in college, finishing with a 3.2 GPA. Now Bob has to pay back those loans and find a job in his major. The problem with Bob is that he's white, so affirmative action works against him. And with this new DEI initiative, getting a job becomes much harder. Bob now is working as a McDonald's employee, but he does well enough to get promoted to store manager. Now it's 2024 and McDonald's is now automating their restaurant, causing Bob's position to be taken over by the either regional manager or general manager, and Bob gets laid off. Because of all the global conflict plus caravans, Bob has run out of his savings and can't find a job. Since Bob has nothing left and has sold everything he has, Bob is now about to be homeless for the first time. Now that Bob is homeless, the likelihood that he will stay clean and sober is very slim. Even worse, the shelters are full. So Bob has to sleep outside where he can get arrested or harassed by the police, creating a criminal record. Bob wasn't lazy, so he keeps looking for work. But with the growing criminal record, his job opportunities are dwindling. Will Bob get off the streets? And if he does, how long will it take? And what services are available for Bob when he first became homeless instead of after he's developed an addiction or a criminal record? Now let's talk about Susan. Susan, like Bob, was a good student, went to college and even got a job in her field. Now that Susan has a career, she wants to start a family. She meets a guy, marries him, and decides to start having children. Years later in the relationship, something sours. Although it's generally women who seek the divorce, this time it was Susan's husband. Because they had kids, it was a nasty divorce. Because the courts are changing, Susan's husband is the one who gets to keep the house and custody of the kids. Now Susan is employed, but has to move quickly. Now that she has child support combined with inflation, Susan can barely afford to pay rent on her salary. One day, Susan is on the way to work and her car breaks down, taking the last of her savings. When Susan gets into work, she finds out that she is being laid off due to an economic downturn. With the rising cost of rent, no savings, and no good job prospects, Susan will become homeless for the first time. Since there are no women's shelters, she has to get services at the men's shelter. Susan makes a friend who one day gets her drunk and takes her by force. After the incident, Susan goes dark and develops a drug addiction. She does tricks just to support her addiction. The trauma from the betrayal of someone she thought was her friend was enough to also develop major mental health issues such as schizophrenia. Will Susan ever recover from this and lead a productive life? The odds are stacked actually against her. I give you these two stories to highlight the complexity of the homeless crisis. Normal, everyday people doing the right thing, getting an education, and going to work are becoming homeless. Although becoming homeless is bad enough, what other consequences did they have to pay for trying to do what society expects of them? You may think these are extreme cases, but unfortunately, this is more common than you think. What makes this worse is that the homeless industrial complex is making money off of the misery of others while offering no real solutions. How much different would Susan's life have been if they had a women's shelter? How much different of an experience would Bob have had if he'd gotten help and hope from the start instead of after he's developed an addiction that the system can profit off of? Once you become homeless, you can't get help unless you're going to be a repeat customer. We have a whole industry set up to take advantage of the less fortunate while not offering any real solutions. Like the Paley Report and its successors, there is a willful arrogance in the homeless industrial complex that imitates what government is doing with its different agendas on climate change. Is this the ugly side of capitalism, or have the elite figured out a way to manage the useless eaters through the homeless industrial complex with the same agenda of population control and reduction like the United Nations? Let me know down in the comments. Thanks for watching. If you want to help the channel, that's all covered in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.